Hi there. Are you ready to study with me? All right, let's go in the book of Acts. We're now ready for video number 12. The Bible tells us plainly many aspects of God's will for our lives. We learn how we're supposed to think, how we're supposed to behave, how we're supposed to live. Yet the unknown part of His will has to do with specific direction and timing. And so Paul's second missionary journey can be a great comfort for us when we're unsure of what God is leading us to do next. We see an apostle who set out on a grand venture without any idea of where he would end up or what he would be doing. As we study chapters 16 through 18 of the book of Acts, we see several things. Are you ready to write these down? Okay, let's go. Number 1, God does not always lead the same way. The beginning of this trip was not nearly so glorious as the beginning of his first trip. Number 2, a rocky start does not mean a crash landing. Paul and Barnabas had a sharp disagreement over whether to take Mark with them, and they split up. But even in this, the work of the gospel was advanced. It was multiplied because Barnabas took Mark, and then Paul brought Silas into the equation. So where we had 2 going at one time, now we have 4. Number 3, it's important for us to remember, not knowing where you're going doesn't mean that you're going nowhere. Look at the scriptures. The Holy Spirit was checking Paul. Now, if you don't know exactly what I was talking about with that statement, make sure you read Acts chapter 16 through 18. You'll find out that Paul had something in mind, and yet the Holy Spirit was saying something differently, preventing that plan from having forward motion. And number 4, being knocked down does not mean being knocked out. They preached a message of deliverance, and they ended up in prison. But their attitude brought their freedom. And not only was it freedom to them, but it was salvation to others. See, attitude is everything. Our circumstances really are secondary to our attitude. What happens in us is much more important than what happens to us. So as this second missionary journey progresses, we see that Paul ministered in Philippi, in Thessalonica, and he faced a riotous mob. And so the 2 men escaped to Berea, and then they went on to Athens. It was in Athens that Paul spoke the language of the intellectual community. You remember that I had said earlier that Paul was raised in Tarsus, and he attended one of the leading universities of that time. So at this point in his ministry, that's extremely helpful. He addressed deism, pantheism, polytheism, and we know that this message has been dubbed the Sermon on Mars Hill. There was no persecution in Athens, but there were very little results either. The journey continued. If Athens was the intellectual and cultural center, then Corinth was the sensual center. And soon after arriving, Paul met a couple, a man and wife, Aquila and Priscilla. These were Jews who had been expelled from Rome, and they became a support system to Paul. He preached with them in synagogues, and together they planted churches. It was in Corinth that Paul received a vision from the Lord, encouraging him to remain faithful because he would protect him. So he stayed here for about 2 years, and then after that, he ventured on to Cenchrea and to Ephesus. Let's continue traveling with him, and let's continue learning. See you next time.